We turn now to a consideration of Paul McCartney's songs on the White Album. These songs, as I've said, there's a majority of them that are based on styles of others, and most of those styles are, not all of them, but most of those styles are past rock and roll styles, or there are a couple that are sort of more current styles. But this tendency to look to the past as a way of trying to move forward, I talked about in the last video. It's one of my kind of big interpretive points on Paul McCartney at this point in their career. So let's sort of go through the Paul songs and see what I mean by that. I'll start by just talking about the ones that are based on other styles. Back in the USSR, certainly as a combination of Chuck Berry and the Beach Boys. Of course, there's this Chuck Berry song, Back in the USA, so Back in the USSR is kind of a comical a send-up of that in a certain kind of way. There's, of course, all the Beach Boys high falsetto stuff, which sort of also refer to the USA. The song itself being a pretty clear AABA form with a partial reprise. So from a formal point of view, it doesn't really take any chances. But I think the most important thing is to see Back in the USSR as really Paul filtering the Chuck Berry Beach Boys thing through his own style and his own sensibility. Obla Di Obla Da is a track that we're going to spend more time on during the close-up, so I won't say too much about it, except that this one is based not only on a contemporary Jamaican artist by the name of Desmond Decker, who was sort of a reggae star or a reggae artist known to Paul McCartney at the time, but also based on a Coasters record, I think, called Little Egypt, but more about that in the next video. Rocky Raccoon is kind of a Dylan talking blues meeting the cowboy song. He gets some help from John and folk singer Donovan on this one. It's a simple verse form, but clearly it's adopting and adapting a style that sort of starts from Dylan sort of talking over the music and then sort of goes into something like an Old West cowboy song or something meant to suggest the Old West or gold, mining for gold or something in the late 19th century, complete with like a sort of a barroom piano solo, that kind of thing. So there you sort of see those kind of stylistic references. Why Don't We Do It, or Why Don't We Do It in the Road, is clearly a blues and R&B parody. I don't think Paul means any disrespect, and it wouldn't have been heard as disrespectful in the day. I think modern sensibilities might say, gosh, it seems like he's making fun of R&B, saying that it can often be vulgar and unsophisticated, and but I don't think that's exactly what he's going for. I think he's playing with the style and having some fun with it and doing it his own way. But again, looking to an earlier style in this case. I Will is an interesting one for me, especially because I Will is almost like Paul looking at the early Beatles. I mean, when you look at this tune, I Will, it's an AABA form. It's got a very interesting little ending, but it's really Paul going into almost his 1963 songwriting mode. Ironically, it's a song he wrote while he was in India. So while everybody else was thinking about transcendental meditation and, Indian culture and various kinds of things and philosophy and all this, Paul's writing a song that harkens back to 1963. Some very Everly Brothers-esque vocals during the bridge. And of course, the Everly Brothers, as we said a couple of weeks ago, very big influence on John and Paul in terms of harmonization. So that one really clearly seems to be looking backward. Birthday is a song that Paul wrote together with John, with some help from John. They say it's in imitation of a song, Happy Birthday Baby. If you compare those songs, A and B them together, yeah, maybe that's what they had in mind. But it's not like they're really doing a very close imitation. It's certainly much rowdier than the original, alternating verses and a bridge on that tune. Helter Skelter, the story goes, was an attempt to be even louder and more aggressive than The Who. Somebody apparently said The Who must be the sort of loudest, most hardest rocking band in popular music, and Paul's thought was, well, I can outdo that. And so in many ways, Helter Skelter was his attempt to be as raw and aggressive as he possibly could. And of course, some people think that's the best thing about it, is just the sort of raw energy of it. It's also got a kind of a Strawberry Fields ending where it kind of goes out and then fades back in again, and then ends, of course, with the famous line, "I've got blisters on me fingers." Anyway, so that Paul McCartney tune, not looking to the past, but looking to another style, the contemporary style of The Who. And then finally, maybe the clearest one that looks to the past, and nobody would argue that, it wouldn't argue with my interpretation at all here, would be the song Honey Pie, which really seems to be based on 20s British pop, what we think of as the jazz age in the United States, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Flappers and all that goes with that. John Lennon, interestingly, playing a jazz guitar solo on that track. Congratulations, John. Well done. An AABA form, and again, this is in a string of songs. We talk about our song strings. Think about Paul doing "When I'm 64," "Your Mother Should Know," "Honey Pie." This is sort of Paul sort of looking back at the music of yesteryear kind of thing, especially looking back at it from 1968. Well, not all of the Paul songs are songs that look back in musical history or deal with other styles of other contemporary artists. A couple of the other songs are really in a kind of a different direction. "Martha, My Dear," for example, is an interesting song written about Paul's sheepdog, but you don't have to appreciate sheepdogs to love the song. The form alternates a verse and a bridge. It's a little bit episodic in the way that it goes along. So maybe it's a little bit influenced by Lovely Rita Meter Maid, in the sense that there's a sort of song and then an ending that goes with it that makes that song seem a little bit episodic. Fantastic piano part on "Martha, My Dear." "Blackbird" really is, in many ways, well, two of these songs that I'm going to talk about now are kind of, can be traced really back to yesterday. "Blackbird" in the sense of Paul just with his guitar doing a song that deals with civil rights struggles. It's just him, his guitar, and the tapping of his feet, responding to the civil rights struggle in the U.S. It's a slightly modified AABA form of "Blackbird" is. I say that it sort of takes us back to yesterday with just Paul solo by himself with the guitar, very sort of singer-songwritery, right? I'm just sort of sitting here, me and my guitar, singing you a song with meaningful lyrics. But "Blackbird" is kind of Paul's parallel to John's Revolution. Right, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. You know, John's Revolution, sort of dealing with the idea of revolution and civil unrest and that kind of thing. Most of that about the Vietnam War. But here's Paul, and you really, again, you see a real contrast between the two personalities. "Blackbird" is a song about an unhappy situation, but it's not an unhappy song. It's really quite a beautiful song. John, on the other hand, is talking about an unhappy situation, and especially the fast version of Revolution is an aggressive song. There's nothing laid back or sort of pretty in that sense about it. So you really see those two personalities. The other one that kind of relates back to yesterday from Paul McCartney on this album is the song "Mother Nature's Son." And here, not only is it just sort of Paul, sort of a solo Paul tune, but instead of the strings as we got on Yesterday or Eleanor Rigby, we get this really nice arrangement of horns and percussion. This is one of those songs that was inspired by something directly in India, and it came directly from a Maharishi lecture on nature. Again, it's a modified AABA form, so we're really not looking at the form to sort of tell us too much, except that it's not just a straight 1964, 1963 style AABA that Paul did so many times back then. But again, these two songs, "Blackbird" and "Mother Nature's Son," really kind of being Paul at the guitar, one sort of more solo and more intimate, the other one bringing a kind of classical sounding kind of horn arrangement in, both of them kind of hearkening back to yesterday, and so we can see him approaching the same kind of song in different kinds of ways here. And then finally, the song "Wild Honey Pie," which about all I can say about "Wild Honey Pie" is it's about a minute of improvised silliness. It's a song that's there just for the fun of it. Again, we probably should keep in mind that the Beatles were partly popular for their kooky sense of humor. And so there's, you know, when you hear Wild Honey Pie and you think about the Beatles and all that, even though that's the kind of track that maybe a lot of other bands wouldn't have released, or it would end up these days as a kind of a bonus track or something. Nevertheless, there it is, a little bit of Paul McCartney. Just being silly in the studio. So having looked now at these Paul songs and surveyed everything that's on the White Album, let's do some Paul song close-ups. We'll look at two of his singles, Lady Madonna and Hey Jude, and then from the White Album, Obla Di, Obla Da.